K&M Geekly. This week, we return to Monkey Island. We talk about the NeverEnding Story and 5 geek things we like. And now your host, Mike Indeglio.
What is up, team? Welcome to K&M Geekly. It's a weekly look at two pals talking about the things they've been geeking out on this week. Keith, here we are again, episode 3. I'm so excited to have you join me. You know, the past few episodes, we've had a lot of feels in, let's say, the negative department. So this week we're focusing on things we like, Keith, which do exist. How are you doing this week, buddy?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I mean, I actually liking things. And I know that makes us sort of rare on the internet. The internet it used to be for porn, but now it's for like rabidly disliking things. Mm-hmm. But you know what? I used to do that in my 20s, but I think as I've gotten older, it's just not nearly as much fun as liking things. So yes, we will. I certainly have things that I don't like, and I have rage tweeted this week. But we're not going to talk about that today.
Wait, you got on Twitter this week?
I got on Twitter. Here's the thing about my social media presence. I try not to have one, especially as a person, because I
especially now, right? Especially now with if what I'm hearing is actually happening, pretty soon we will have a new overlord on Twitter, and he will fire everyone. Is what I read.
Yes, with any luck. So, or with the opposite of whatever that is. You know, words, talking, it's early in the morning. So I only update my Instagram for my cat. I'm on Facebook for, you know, this K&M stuff. But on Twitter, I actually logged on. I have no followers. I don't ever say anything, but I have been rage tweeting the NHL about their digital board ads, which are ruining the game, but we're going to do a segment on that maybe next week. Not this week, because this week we like stuff.
We do. Keith, before we get into the meat and potatoes of things, I want to say this on air live.
Okay.
Keith, I want you to keep your eyes peeled out the door for the Amazon man today.
Oh, I was about to say there was a trap.
I got in my feels, and I might have sent you a little present.
Is it a present to mute my desk when I hit it?
No, I think you'll be much more pleased with what it is. I don't want to spoil it though. Maybe it'll come during the show if there's any luck in the world.
Maybe it will. I mean, I can see the front stoop if I look up from the basement here. So,
all right.
Oh, I'm excited now. Toys.
Right. Well, what anything you've been obsessively researching or doing this week before we jump into the show proper?
Well, I mean, all the things that we're about to talk about, but actually another segment that I want to do. At some point in my real life, I write musicals, and I write a lot of music and record a lot of music. And I have been geeking out on virtual instruments, VSTs, and I have the whole Contact VST suite that I paid $1 gazillion for. And so I have been arranging songs for my new musical, and it's so exciting, and it's exhilarating to be able to do stuff so fast. You notate it, you put it into the computer, boom, it's fully orchestrated, and it sounds pretty good. So we'll talk about that later, but that's what I was doing this morning, rewriting lyrics.
Oh, that's really cool. I've been obsessively cleaning, and my wife is out of town for a while, and so I have this whole place to myself. And so to keep my mind off being sad and having feelings, I have been doing what I think a lot of maybe OCD techies out there will appreciate. I have been doing chord management, Keith. I have been crawling under desks, under beds, behind cabinets, and just obsessively twisty tying, routing cords and cabling so that everything appears wireless when in reality there are thousands of wires running throughout this joint. So that's what I've been up to.
I completely understand, both from the standpoint of somebody who does like to do some cable management, and Lord knows if you could see what I can see right now, you'd be like, you suck at it. But I also understanding Mike's brain. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he deletes his important files off of his computer to make sure that there's enough space for his important files.
Well, ready for this? Mike outfitted his apartment, his small apartment, with gigabit Wi-Fi 6, which is faster than any human being needs, and yet I'm still running Ethernet cables to everything. So what's the point of the Wi-Fi? Just in case.
what's the point of any of it, really? I mean,
You're right.
Yeah, I'm running 2 routers in the tiny house. There's no reason for that.
I love our friendship. So, ladies and gentlemen, Keith talked last week about how he was chasing the feeling that being afraid watching horror movies as a kid gave him. And in many of our podcasts, and I'm sure as you get older, many of you have felt, you're chasing feelings from growing up. And maybe it's because if you were blessed enough like we were to have a really innocent and lovely childhood. Well, at least the experience seemed that way at the time. I mean, we're not going to go deep into our therapy here, but there was a warmth of before life gave you a bunch of responsibilities. And so, I think back and it's weird things that trigger that. Now, hold on. Let me clarify one other thing. There are 2 distinct types of nostalgia feelings I have generally. There's one that is what I just said. It's very warm and comforting and reminds me of a simpler time, and it fills me with joy. Now, smells can bring me there, ideas can bring me there, memories, YouTube videos. I'm loving YouTube because you can revisit old commercials and TV shows and things like that. There's the other side of nostalgia that has, for me at least, a bittersweet connotation, that it reminds me of times that have passed and people and things that are gone, and there's a feeling of loss, and it's a bittersweetness. It's not sadness per se, but it's a bittersweetness. This week, we're focusing on some things that are the former, that bring us that warmth. And so we've been teasing this since the beginning. This was kind of one of the main things we wanted to talk about on this pod, and I'm glad we can finally get there this week. So we're going to jump into what we're calling right now, I guess, retro talk.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about some things that bring us that feeling. And it's not often we can revisit it. What's funny is that nostalgia is huge right now as far in commercially, meaning TV shows are rebooting, toy lines are refreshing. People are trying to monetize that feeling of nostalgia. For better or for worse. That's a conversation that we could really...
I mean, to be fair, that's also what we're trying to do right this very minute. So.
Absolutely, 100%. So the feeling I'm having this week, first I want to talk about is we haven't been able to talk too much about it on our other channels, and it's that I've always been a huge video gamer. Ever since my dad bought our first... Well, we had an Atari, and then we had an Intellivision. And then my dad bought us a Nintendo, and that's when things blew up. Now, my mom swore that we weren't allowed to have a Nintendo, Keith. We were not allowed to have a Nintendo, but my dad bought us a secret Nintendo that my brother and I, for a good 3 to 4 months, were able to hide. We'd wait till my mom went to bed, and we would sneak up into my bedroom, and we'd have to take it out of the closet.
An illicit Nintendo?
We did. To the point where... My dad, I'll never forget, in a great marriage and a great learning lesson about communication, he was like, "Don't you ever let your mother find out about this."
What was he thinking?
He wasn't.
At what point did he think that was possible?
It was not possible because we were screaming, and my mom finally caught it, and she didn't talk to us legitimately for almost 2 weeks. Like, it was like a 2-week silent treatment. It was very, 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 very damaging, actually.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, what was her reasoning behind... Like, the Atari's fine, the Intellivision is fine, but I draw my line at Nintendo?
Well, I think that if you were to go back to a lot of the mainstream sort of news at the time, video games were going to melt your brain, and they were going to rot your innocence and teach you nothing but violence. And I did get pretty close with the zapper on Duck Hunt, so maybe there was some truth to it, but... I found throughout my life, well, we can get into the nitty-gritty of our first consoles and whatnot, but I found throughout my life that gaming has been a great respite for my brain. I suffer from some OCD tendencies, some really attention deficit challenges. I have some challenges. I find that gaming is a way for me to calm my brain, for me to escape some of my fidgetness and to really kind of relax. And so I've enjoyed it in that regard. I've also enjoyed it as a way to enjoy different types of narrative. I really enjoy narrative in gaming. And I love puzzle solving, but I don't have the patience to sit down and do a Sudoku puzzle or a crossword and whatnot. But for some reason, in a virtual space, I'm able to really focus and enjoy puzzle solving, really. So that brings me to one of my first loves. Now, when we would go to my neighbor's house, Mrs. Dugan, we would watch her on her, I wish I could remember what type of PC it was. It was an early PC with CGA graphics. This is before even VGA graphics. I think you had like a stunning 16 color gamut.
Right.
Not 16,000, 16.
No, I remember.
It was like a Tandy or a Commodore.
Commodore
I
64.
think it was a little bit past that. But anyway, she was big on, I guess she had to be our age at the time, which is crazy, maybe a little younger. But we would sneak in and we would watch her play the original Sierra point-and-click adventure games.
Oh, sure. Space Quest,
King's Quest.
Played all those.
Leisure Suit Larry, which she would be like, we wouldn't get it. We couldn't get the sexual humor at the time. We were very young. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. This is the early 80s, mid-80s. But we knew that we were not supposed to be seeing this, so we would watch it. We wouldn't get any of the humor. And then when she would go away, we would sneak on and try to crack the password protection, which was really just they would ask you trivia questions. Like,
right. Wait. So you snuck into her house? Like, was she on vacation?
Like me and my
friend
Chris, she would sit there and play Sierra games and chain smoke, and we would wait till she would be finished and go downstairs to do whatever, whatever she was doing. And we would jump on the computer to play games, but we would try to play Leisure Suit Larry, basically.
Well, of course, yeah.
So that translated into when I got my first computer, which was my first real computer. We had a Commodore 64, but when I convinced my dad to buy me a Packard Bell with like a 1X CD-ROM drive, right? That was like my first big one.
What was it? Was it like a 386 or 486?
Something like that, yeah. And we had, it's all we had on the CD-ROM at that point was Encarta, the encyclopedia. There wasn't any games yet. And I would get the floppy disks,
so well.
And I would play. I got into first Clade, which was it was a game called Less Manly. But then I was able to start getting old versions of the floppy disk-based LucasArts adventure games. That became my jam. So we're talking Grim Fandango. We're talking The Dig. Different games. LucasArts was obviously George Lucas's production company, but they opened a game division. They hired a lot of people from Sierra and a lot of things, and these were very high graphic point-and-click adventure games. And one of the ones I fell in love with early on was called The Secret of Monkey Island. Now, this was a game created by LucasArts with, I'm trying to remember, make sure I get it right, Ron Gilbert, Dave Grossman, and Tim Schafer. Tim Schafer, who would go on to do some great ones, Day of the Tentacle, Maniac Mansion, and some other really famous games. And he went on to form, what's the name of his? He's got a game studio to this day, but regardless, this was the adventure of a pirate named Guybrush Threepwood, who was a young dude trying to make his name in the pirate world. And what really stood out, aside from the graphics in these types of point-and-click adventure games, was the humor. And this was my first introduction to what humorous writing, comedic writing, could bring to narrative storytelling. Because point-and-click adventure games, for any of those who played them, basically, they're puzzle boxes. You walk in, you need to do XYZ, you collect a bunch of items by picking them up, and then you use items in various ways. Oh, we gotta pick this lock. We got a pencil. I'm gonna jam the pencil in the lock and try to pick it. That can get pretty tedious pretty quick. Especially when you start to use crazy logic. Each individual game has its own sort of logic you have to figure out what type of things. That can get tedious. Or very bang your head against the wall hard, because back in the day there was no internet. So what you did was you could buy a hint book for $30 that had a little red thing. It was all red, and you put it over the little book, and you could read the hints. I couldn't afford that crap. I was lucky if I get my parents to buy me the game in the first place. So I didn't get no hints. I had to figure it out. I had to solve the puzzle. And that could become very tedious until I discovered the LucasArts adventures. Also, Sam and Max Hit the Road. And they were so funny, laugh out loud funny. And I think it's because you ever play, sorry, I'm going to go around the block here. Do you ever play like Cards Against Humanity or those Jackbox games with a group of people who don't have the same sense of humor as you?
Oh, it's terrible.
It's terrible. But when you find that group of people who have the same sense of humor or the same wit, the same speed of wit,
Yeah.
it's the best time you can have. And Ron Gilbert and Tim Schafer and Monkey Island, if this was the first one, had my sense of humor. So I clicked on everything, even if it didn't have to do anything with the game. I would just click on an item just to hear the character, or at this time, read what the character thought about that thing. And it was always funny, and I would laugh out loud. And I just remember spending hours at night taking notes on what types of things I should collect, on what puzzles I still needed to solve, because it wasn't a very robust quest log at the time, right? That wasn't quite where we were.
It wasn't Red Dead 2 quite yet.
Yeah. So I remember that was the first adventure game I solved. And then you get to the end of the game and you realize you don't really discover what the secret of Monkey Island is. So that was in 1990, the first one. So I was 10 years old, right? And that was me exploring that universe. There were 3 other games. There was Monkey Island 2. Then it got rebooted, and that wasn't until, let's see if I can remember actually. Monkey Island 2 came out in 91, so it was the next year, but I surely didn't play it the next year. I think I had to wait a little bit longer. But I remember playing it, and then it kind of went away. And it wasn't until 97 where the next game, the third game in the series, came out, and that was the first one on CD-ROM. That's when I had my Packard Bell, or at that point I might have had a Gateway 2000. That was my big...
Oh, those Gateway machines.
Yeah, remember? And that's one of the first times I had this nostalgic feeling, because I was recapturing a feeling of innocence when I was 10, and now I'm 17 years old in high school playing, it was the first cel-shaded version. So anyway, Keith, every time I've been able to revisit point-and-click adventure games, I've done so. As I've become an adult and I've built my own PCs or I've been on gigs or whatnot, I always try to see like what's new in the point-and-click adventure realm. And there are some people making cool games, retro-type games. Steam, which is kind of where you play PC games right now, is the Wild West. Nothing's curated well. It's hard to pick what's absolute junk from what's really good. It's just a minefield, and I don't have time to sort through all of that. So lo and behold, a couple months ago, during one of these game conferences or these big spectacular what's coming up type events, E3 or whatnot, they shadow dropped an announcement that there was another entry in the Monkey Island series coming out. And it would be a point-and-click adventure game like the old ones with updated art, a revised sort of relook at how adventure games could work. And because, nowadays with the way we can do graphics and interaction, point-and-click adventure is very old school. But best of yet, Ron Gilbert was coming back to the series because I think he did the first 2 games and then he was out, right? So everything's been just like the Halloween series, other people take on the IP and they do their own explorations. So this is the first time Ron Gilbert was coming back. So about a month ago, it came out for Nintendo Switch and for PC. And I downloaded it, and I expected to spend maybe, it was $20 or whatever. I expected to spend maybe an hour with it, get the feeling, laugh, and then be done with it. And I have to say, I was totally wrong. Somehow they were able to nail it. And I have re-fallen in love with this game. You can see the art style they've revisited the art style. It's very Ren and Stimpy, if you remember that show. It's kind of really cool paintings, but every once in a while they will, you'll click an item and it'll do a hyper close-up of that item and it'll be all gross and sort of like hairs popping out of it. Very Ren and Stimpy-esque. They've sort of revisited the way that the inventory system works. It's a very kind of painterly look. And what's cool is that they're having it done as Guybrush has this young, the main character from the original games has this child now, and he's recounting this last chapter of the story to his son. So it follows its audience as they've
Right.
aged, and it's kind of
Right.
reframed the narrative from its original audience's perspective now. And it's got the same wit that I remember. Everything is laugh out loud funny. It's fully voice acted from Dominic Amato, who's done the voice since they added voice to the game. And the puzzles, and what they've done is they've reframed how puzzles work. Basically, instead of having you pixel hunt, to find the little thing you need, everything is pretty much you're able to find right away. And they have a quest log for you. They've done quality of life improvements as games do now. But what you can't teach and you can't, it all revolves around the writing. The writing is hilarious, and the story is heartfelt and hilarious, and it takes a 21st century look at people's respect for people's time. It doesn't belabor any points. It has a really unique hint system so that you don't abuse it and you don't go to the internet for just to get a walkthrough. You have this, they call her the voodoo lady, and if you have a certain amount of times, you can go to this enchanted book, and it'll be like, hey, Keith, have you looked over there? And then if you're a little more annoyed, you can click it again. Up like, hey, Keith, have you looked under the pillow over there? It'll just hint you towards it, which is actually really clever, and it keeps you from going to the internet. But none of the puzzles are too belabored. The game's not too belabored. It revalues your time. It is like your, I don't know, this is a weird analogy, but it's like your grandma who's passed away has come back to visit for the day and has cooked all of her favorite foods that you remember as a kid. And it's just like a tasting smorgasbord of all those feels, and it still holds up. And the fact that you can go back to something and they were able to, and it helps that it's the original creator, right? I think that's the special sauce here. That you can go back to something and it doesn't let you down is just so wonderful. I'm savoring every moment. I'm playing for like an hour, and then I make myself stop so that I have some more to play the next day. And it's the way gaming should be now. It works on everything. I can play it on my laptop. I can play it on my PC. I can get it on the Switch if I want. So it's anywhere I want it to be. It's just a little slice of magic, and I can't recommend it high enough. Now, I have a huge affinity for the IP, so it's hard for me to say if you would love it if you've never played any of these games. What's great is that in the past couple of years, LucasArts has re-released many of the first games with collector's editions that have updated graphics, but you can toggle on the old graphics if you want. So you can actually do
that's a good idea.
It's totally awesome, and they're really cheap on Steam bundles. You can get them all for like under $20. I absolutely cannot recommend this higher. If for some reason you weren't a point-and-click adventure person when you were a kid, if that wasn't your jam, I highly recommend. But this is a great jumping-off point. And for those of you who haven't played the games, the opening sequence, instead of just being like previously on, what they do is there's a scrapbook. And you open the scrapbook, and you click on different pictures, and then Guybrush here walks you through his memory and recollection of how he got certain thing and why it's in the scrapbook, which is actually a callback to the original game, setting you up for the current narrative. So, point-and-click adventure games, twofold. I want to say, I'm back in on point-and-click adventure games. There's some others I'd talk about at another time. I've downloaded a few. I'm back into this world. I just think it's such a, instead of doing the crossword, now I'm playing some games and I'm getting back into narratives. I particularly like the funny ones, but not necessarily. Curse of Monkey Island, Return to Monkey Island here. You can get it on Nintendo Switch. You can get it on Steam. I highly recommend just to play it for a little while. Even if you've never played the games before, it's incredibly well written. It's incredibly voice acted, and it's beautiful to look at. And it's a cool story. So if you want to laugh, if you want a little bit of that feeling of the way games used to be, this is where I think you should jump in.
Well, it's very interesting to hear you talk about that, and it makes me think about how video games had to diverge because of technology. When we started out with the point and click ones, like you're talking about, because we didn't have the ability to do much graphically at all. right? You couldn't do anything 3D. The graphics were very simple, very rudimentary. You had to write the games, not design the graphics and the fighting mechanisms and blah 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 blah. And I think what you were responding to is the writing. It's the cleverness. You're in a book. You're in a whatever. And then once that Nintendo came out, right, there wasn't writing in games for a long, long time. It was, you're playing Contra. It's jump, shoot, monster. You have to flip over this and do that. It was much more visual. It was much more tactical. But today, I think we're in some ways in the golden age of gaming because you have those two things diverged and now have come back together where we have all of the graphics, all of the motion, all of the, running around and pew pew with the story and narrative put back in it, which is why, like, when you play Red Dead 2 or even a simpler game like Unravel, right? You're able to have beautiful storytelling and acting and cinematic stuff and the pew pew at the same time. And we have something that has never really been in video games, and that is emotion. And I never once felt anything playing my games for a long, long time. And now multiple games I'm playing, with the narrative, the storytelling, the acting, the writing. I'm like, oh God, I'm feeling things. And what a great addition to gaming is more complex, better written storytelling, as well as the upgrade in the frame rate and the graphics and this, that, the other thing. It's very interesting. I remember, point and clicks. I didn't do any of these because I think once the Nintendo came out, right, I just went into that world. But I do remember Space Quest and King's Quest, all the Sierra stuff. And I remember how desperately frustrating they were because there was no mouse even. So if you just need to and you had to type pick up rock, use rock. But if you typed in throw rock at monster, I don't know what that means. Use rock with the code. You had to code it essentially.
Well, and the thing that Sierra games did quite often, which was very frustrating, but it's how they padded length, was they were very kill heavy. So if you made a wrong choice on a puzzle, you generally would die.
And you just start over.
Yeah, especially if you weren't F5ing, which F5 was a hotkey for you to save. I mean, these weren't there was no autosave, zero. No. So you had to remember that as well. What the Lucasfilms games did, the LucasArts games, was they started implementing non-death states. So you could fail a puzzle, but not... the other thing Sierra games would do is if you didn't pick up an item 17 hours ago, dead end. So you've continued, and now you can't finish the game, but they don't tell you that. Right. So the LucasArts games fixed a lot of that, and now they've honed it to they've just honed it to a perfection. This game, I haven't finished it yet, so hopefully it sticks to the ending. But even if it didn't, the journey has been such a joy. I really, if you get a bug up your butt or there's a sale on Steam or whatnot, I really think it's under $20. This game is worth playing. It's that funny, on its own without all the nostalgia feels.
And calibrating the difficulty of games is so important, and because you don't want them to be impossible, because then I'll give up. But then there are other times where it's the latest generation of Tomb Raider games, which I love. I love them. They're fun. I've played them all multiple times, but they're all a little easy.
Yeah.
And you can make it harder, but only the combat. And I don't really care about the combat as much as I do the running and climbing and sneaking and finding stuff on the Tomb Raider game. So,
Keith, I think you need to find yourself a used PlayStation 4 and play the Uncharted sequence, because imagine being Indiana Jones. That's what those games are. You can get a cheap
that's what
PS4.
Tomb Raider is.
Yeah, but there's a whole other element you haven't experienced yet as a non-PlayStation guy.
All right. Well,
also, last thing I'll say for you specifically, Keith, and let me say who it is, because the score for all of the Monkey Island games is such a banger. It's a Caribbean sort of vibe. The opening theme, you should just YouTube. I'm not going to put it on our show so we don't get a strike, but it's this game is released by Devolver Digital, by the way, and Terrible Toy Box. Oh man, who does the score? Oh, it's well, I apologize for not. I don't want to just. Michael Land. It's Google it, give it a YouTube. It's a banger. So Mike and Deglio highly recommends Return to Monkey Island, and point and click adventure games in general. If you have any great ones that you want to share with us, you can send those to K&M Geekly at gmail.com, or just YouTube comment here below.
Yeah,
what are some
type in
point
the
and click?
comments.
What are some point and click adventure games you're digging on?
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, I'm excited to talk about my retro talk segment, and I teased it before, so it's not a spoiler that I'm going to talk about the NeverEnding Story,
Rad.
which I was such a huge fan of when I was little. I mean, it's a couple of different things. It came out in 1984, so I was I don't think I saw it for a couple of years after that. But my mother was a librarian, so this was always a movie that she encouraged because it's so much about reading,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously started as a book, but it's this. If you haven't seen it before, absolutely go watch. I feel like if you're watching this, you've probably seen it before, and you have some sort of a touchstone to it. But it's this wild, crazy fantasy kids movie that's just done in a way that could never be done today. Right. It is way darker than any kids movie would be allowed to be. The production of it was crazy. It was shot in Germany.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, it was the highest budget for a German produced film ever. And it was directed by Wolfgang Petersen, who's a German director who directed Enemy Mine, and then after this, he directed Outbreak, Air Force One, The Perfect Storm. Troy became a huge director, but this was, I believe, his first English language film. And I think a lot of things resonated with this movie for me. Obviously, all the great fantasy elements, the effects, all of the practical fantasy effects are amazing. Falcor, but really it's about this nerdy kid who the framing device is it's like this nerdy kid in our world reading the story of the NeverEnding Story, which is this great fantasy epic, but then he realizes that he as the reader is a part of the story. And there's this moment where it sort of breaks the fourth wall of his book, where he starts reading about himself as he's reading the book. It's so cool. It's very heady, but also just exhilarating. And he's a nerdy kid who liked books, and that was me, right? And he was bullied in a way that was realistic, right? The bullies in this movie aren't like the nice Disney bullies; they're like real bullies,
Mm-hmm.
and there's an element of danger to it. That felt very real, and on some level, the element of danger was also there while filming. And so there's some stuff that maybe shouldn't have happened. The Noah Hathaway, who played Atreyu in it, he almost drowned in the in the swamp of sadness sequence where we have that horrible scene with the horse. Which just we're all traumatized, but he got caught in an elevator and got sucked down.
I did not know that, actually.
Yeah, he got caught in an elevator, and by the time they saved him, he was unconscious, being underwater. Like, it was real bad. And he also almost lost an eye in the fight with the Gmork. But look at those practical effects. These are just incredible, and one of the few that I don't think Jim Henson did. But these mixing in the practical miniatures with real life stuff, it was unbelievably cool and looked amazing. So you have the turtle there, you have the rock biter, you had Falcor. It's just an extraordinarily visual movie, and it's also incredibly emotional. I mean, I mentioned the scene with the horse in the swamp of sadness. Like, you could never film that today. The horses were fine, but I don't think it was a fun thing to shoot. It'll never happen again. But my God, the emotional experience of watching that horse, oh my God, as a kid, it just kills you.
You know what's kind of a Hall of Shame type of situation is the the pain of that is so viscerally real to me that I haven't revisited this movie since I think I was 12 years old. Because that's what I remember. Two things: that scene and the banger soundtrack.
Well, of course, the NeverEnding Story song, which of course is, I mean, you already hear it in your head. So it's there.
The
that was actually not
NeverEnding Story.
Yeah, and that was actually not in the original German version of it. That was added for the American version, which Steven Spielberg helped to edit and adapt for the American audiences. But yeah, I mean, everything about this movie just sucked me in immediately. I was obsessed with this movie. I feel like I'm due a watch of the NeverEnding Story again.
Yeah, as you're talking about, I'm thinking, actually, this might be something I might do with Jens this weekend.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's just...
Has it been like 4K up-rendered? I'm sure it has by now,
I believe so. Yeah, I believe you can see a good version of it. There were a bunch of sequels of less quality as they move forward, but I'd stay here with the original. It's just, I mean, look at those. Look at the practical effects here and the creature effects. I think it still holds up today.
Now, the basic premise is sort of they did a very similar thing with Princess Bride, right? About the story being read to a younger child and him sort of envisioning it in his head. But the difference here was that Atreyu becomes not Atreyu. The kid kind of becomes part of the story, right?
Bastian, yeah,
Bastian.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's his magical book, right? And so at the end of the movie, he has to save the day by interacting with the story. And
there's that little the symbol on the front has something to do with it.
Symbol on the front, yeah. I mean, at the end, like he has to believe that the story is real in order to save the characters in the story. It's absolutely fascinating.
Everyone has their sort of seminal childhood, kind of even before they remember movie. Like I know Jen's is Willow.
Sure.
You've got the Dark Crystals of the world. You've got the Last Unicorns of the world. And one of the unifying themes of many of these films is that they're all a little probably too dark.
Yeah.
But there's that moment in time where, you know, when you're young, it's all kid shows and it's all innocence, right? They don't really want the darkness to enter. That's not something you're really prepared to handle emotionally just yet. But then there's the junction period between the two, and that's when they stick with you. You know, when Bambi's mom kicks it. That's your brain's
Old Yeller, you got a lot of those.
Yeah, and your brain's trying to realize like, oh, can that happen in real? And you're starting to become a real person, right? And that's why that pain is so deep and rememberable.
And I wonder, and I don't really know the answer to this, but I would imagine it's probably, I think I know where I'd come down. Kids raised like us, we're 80s kids, right? 80s kids were raised on NeverEnding Story, Dark Crystal, Old Yeller. You know, you have these very adult feelings, full stakes feelings in your movies that were just darker. What kind of influence that had on us culturally? Do 80s kids just walk around in the world a little differently because they saw these things earlier? I don't really know, but I don't think it was harmful. I think in a lot of ways, because, you know, what's happening in these, you're learning stakes and empathy, right? And to, you know, that things are real, that it's, you know, it's not all just going to be magically fixed. You know, like a Disney movie.
Yeah, or a rollicking good time, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Secret of the Ooze, Keith.
I mean, I don't know how you could improve on that. That's the Vanilla Ice one, right?
Yes, it is. Go Turtles, go Ninja, go Ninja, go.
Go Ninja, go Ninja, go.
Yeah. Well, and they form these core memories, right? These core memories that are deep. It's funny. I only bring that one up, the Turtles movie, because my core memory of that is being at a movie theater. It's sheer embarrassment because my grandmother pulled an attendant aside and asked him to turn it down. And for some reason, that embarrassed me to a point where it's a core memory. It sticks with me.
It's a core memory. But yeah, you never know what's going to stick with you. and I didn't see NeverEnding Story in the theaters. Obviously, I was only 4. But I'm curious. I know that I did see NeverEnding Story 2 in the theaters, which came out in 1990. When in 1990? I'm curious whether I saw it. I think it was on my birthday that I saw it. But yeah. Speaking of sad transitions, it starred Jonathan Brandis was the lead in it. Anyway, so yeah, if you haven't seen it, if by some chance you haven't seen it, whether you're an adult or a kid, or seen it recently, I think I might just watch it tonight. I think I might have solidified what my evening is going to be. So, NeverEnding Story, 1984. Just really incredible stuff. Just close your eyes through the swamp of sadness, because you will be swamped in your sadness. But anyway, check it out. NeverEnding Story, my retro fave.
So let us know in the comments what your core movie memories are. And speaking of core, Keith, people that are core to the very existence of our empire are our patrons. Who are we thanking this week?
Well, I'll tell you, we are thanking Brian Kaufman, Casey Clark, Cloudlover69, Jason Moe, Jorge Navoa, and the mysterious Anne, Worf's Boot Shivs, Alan Zimmerman, CRM Productions, Charles Babbage, and at Grim Toys. And you can find all of them. You can join them at patreon.com/K&M, spell out that and you can get all sorts of fun bonus materials, bonus episodes of us watching stuff, and Mike watching Deep Space Nine all by his lonesome, as well as AMAs. If you ever want to ask us any questions, we will answer no matter what you ask.
And if for some reason you found this video through the algorithm and you're not familiar with Keith and I, and you're not completely disgusted, which you have every right to be, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We do some other content that you might like, and give us a like, give us a notification bell. I don't know. Click everything you can possibly click. That would be
click all the buttons.
Yeah, tell a friend.
The buttons are helpful to us.
Yada, yada, yada. So, we want to talk about some things that we've been geeking out on. This week and in recent weeks, as I mentioned, Keith and I are both living that solo life right now. We're home alone. And so there's a lot of time on our hands to fill up.
So we're going to tell you about some of the things we're watching.
So my idea here was, since we tend to ramble on, was we're going to talk about things we've been geeking out on, but I'm going to put a timer up on the screen, Keith. 90 seconds. Okay. You can go less than 90 seconds, but at 90 seconds, it's a hard out. You got to wrap it up.
It's a hard out. Okay. Are we going to go? We're going to go back.
That's what I think we should go back and forth.
I like it.
Which is going to be very difficult because I have to. There's a lot of buttons to press, but
sounds like your problem.
I'm going to do so. I'll go first.
Okay.
Okay, and I would like to talk about a new book I've been reading. Hold on, let me pull up my stuff. By Stephen King. It's called Fairy Tale. And I'm going to start my timer right now. So, Keith, both you and I are fans of Stephen King. This newest book, but sometimes it's hard for people to get invested because there's a huge cast of characters. But here it's less so. Here you get introduced to this kid, Charlie. Through some machinations of the plot, he meets Mr. Bowditch, who has an awesome German Shepherd named Radar. Okay, so we spend the first quarter of the book just getting to know Charlie falling in love with this dog. Anybody who's had a pet or has had a dog, you know how they can capture your heart. And Mr. Bowditch and Radar lead Charlie down a path to a very Kingian, discovering, Keith, gold. But gold, clearly, there's too much gold, and it's how did we get the gold, and where did the gold come from? And so, in a very Kingian fashion, we are led into a different world, a different universe, with all kinds of creatures and monsters and excitement. So it's got a horror twist, but it's very much also a fable/dark fairy tale-esque type tale on the second half of the book. I am loving it. I'm riveted. And I highly suggest you pick up the audiobook like I did, read by Seth Nurich, I think his name is. Numrich. It's an incredible performance, so you can listen to it on a drive or on a whatnot. So highly recommend Stephen King's Fairy Tale.
All right. So I think when appropriate, the other person should be allowed one question
Okay, I think that's great.
about the topic.
Mhm.
And my one question about, is this in the same world as The Eyes of the Dragon, which is another Stephen King fantasy book in that world?
Not directly as into my knowledge. Now, as you may know, all of Stephen King's works are sort of within the Dark Tower metaverse, and this is firmly planted in the Dark Tower metaverse. But I don't think it's directly linked to that novel.
Okay.
That is my understanding thus far.
Okay. All right. So you got me on the clock. So my first one is Ms. Marvel on Disney Plus, which I know I'm a little bit late. It's been out for a couple of months now. But I've actually found this series to be delightful. It's sort of designed for kids. And I know it's been taking a lot of heat, but one of the reasons it takes a lot of heat is because people are, bigoted.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Because it is about a Muslim teenager in Jersey City who is a big fan of the Marvel heroes and discovers that, hey, guess what? She has superpowers herself. And, the effects aren't great and the storytelling, is a little kiddish, but it's designed for that. But I think Iman Vellana as Kamala Khan is delightful and super fun. And I think as somebody who's lived in a primarily Muslim neighborhood for many years, this is a community and people that look much more like the actual people that I know than what we're used to seeing as represented on film and television. And so am I in that community? Of course, no, I'm not. However, I do think I really appreciated a window into this world that we don't normally get. And I'm sure there are inaccuracies and things that aren't natural, but I was like, this feels much more like what I know.
The timer is great, actually. I'm glad it wasn't 60 seconds. My one question to you was, I watched the pilot here and really enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to jump back in. Does it attempt to tie it to the greater Marvel universe, or is it a pretty standalone story?
No, it is definitely going to merge with the Marvel universe. Actually, the next Captain Marvel movie is going to include Kamala Khan.
Oh, great.
So, no, it definitely becomes more a part of the it is a standalone story, but it is definitely a part of the Marvel universe.
All right, so let's go to the world of music. I want to talk to you about an album I've been listening to by the Beths. Keith, I found this because I love gear, I love recording and different just analog stuff, and so I came upon a YouTube video called Show Us Your Junk, which is it follows people going through their recording studio and showing them a bunch of stuff. I found this guy, Jonathan Pierce, and he's got this cool recording studio. He's from New Zealand, and he was talking about this awesome thing where New Zealand actually funds their artists. You can apply for grants, and if your music is good enough or they think it has potential, they give you money to record singles and videos. And
communism.
That led this guy, Jonathan Pierce, to hook up with his collaborator, Elizabeth Stokes. They started a band called the Beths. New Zealand actually, hey Charlie, New Zealand actually funded their recording and their first album and their first tour, and who knew it? They released 3 albums. I got their latest album through finding this YouTube video, and I absolutely love it. It's a rock album, but it's got great, really clever lyrics, some cool, really awash in excellent harmonies. The production is tight. It's excellent. It uses a lot of creative stuff, but it's definitely all recorded with musicians in a room. It's not trying to be anything more than it is. It's just a straight up rock and roll album with really clever albums, and I'm just sort of obsessed with New Zealand people, the Kiwis. I've met a bunch of them on various cruises. A lot of fun, really down to earth, and that's what this record feels like. So if you even remotely like rock music and guitar riffs, check this out. I'm going to play less than 30 seconds so that we're not struck, but I want you guys to hear it just to get a vibe to see if it's something you might like.
30-second thing is an utter...
It's not real?
It's not real.
Well,
that's an old wives' tale.
Let's see what we think.
Freeze time, go to the wild, suck up the quiet till I'm dripping with it. Then I would drive home, go to my room, bring myself out, that would be the end of it. Instead it's white noise, sufferingly loud, it's wearing me down, I'm up to my ears in it.
Really cool album. It's the Beth's. You can find it on all of your streaming music platforms. Check it out.
Very cool. All right. So my next geek out is what I've been listening to, but it's not musical at all. It's just people talking. And that is the 538 Politics podcast. Now, of course, I'm a big politics nerd. Where's my clock, buddy?
Oh, go.
I'm a big political nerd, and we don't talk about that a lot. You obviously know where I stand. But what I really like about the 538 Politics podcast is they're not there necessarily to talk as much about the politics, but the numbers behind the politics. Obviously, a lot of it is about polling and so forth, but it's also demographic changes, migration within the country, and it's done by very, very smart people. Obviously, Nate Silver is the guy who owns and runs 538 Politics podcast. But my favorite sub-podcast of the 538 Politics podcast is Model Talk. And Nate Silver and the team create their sort of prognostication model for all of the elections coming up. And we're about to hit the midterms. Make sure you vote. But he and Galen Druk do super nerdy deep dives into the analytics creating these models, and they have different versions of the models and how they talk about the polls that they're getting, how they're rating the pollsters, how the methodology behind all of the information, and how you shade this way and that versus historical information versus the new poll that comes out versus the quality of the poll versus other factors versus regression to the mean versus the political trends over time. It's really, really fascinating if you like math and politics.
Yeah, I feel like Nate Silver has, because of a lot of his sort of like clear-cut observations about the numbers, often gets demonized about his political stances, where he doesn't really come down either way. He tries not, at least. He's really about the numbers, and I think that's interesting.
He's all he cares about is the math.
Yeah.
For this standpoint, and getting the math as accurate as it is. It has nothing to do with anybody's politics. It has to do with how to accurately crunch the data, and it's fascinating. I love it.
All right, so next I want to talk about guys, I bought this awesome iPad about 2 years ago, and I have not been using it a lot. So what I decided to do is jump back into comics as I've been alone. And since it's spooky season, someone turned me on to this anthology horror comic series called Ice Cream Man. This is written by Maxwell Prince and drawn by Martin Morazzo. Right now, I think there are 24 issues. They are standalone issues. There's a meta story about this ice cream man who's not really an ice cream man. He's sort of like a crypt keeper, but much more horrific. It's got a American Horror Story vibe, a Tales from the Crypt vibe. It's spooky, it's scary, it's gory, it's incredibly well drawn. The stories are really interesting. There is a meta story about this character and like this sort of very gunslinger-esque man in black character who's chasing him down. Regardless, I love it because you can jump in anywhere, but there's only 24 issues. You can get them on Amazon. We'll link them below. It's awesome. I'm so excited to be back into comics. My big thing about comics is it's hard to find a jumping in point. And so I'm really liking standalone stories. So I'm asking all of you out there, could you hit us up in the comments? What are some standalone comic stories or new things happening in comics? This is by Image Comics, by the way. That you could recommend to me, because I'm loving reading comics on my iPad right now. Recommendations, Keith. I don't know if you're a comic buy. You need to read this. This has got Keith Varney written all over it.
So you might have said, but the ice cream man, the protagonist is he a good guy or a bad guy?
Oh no, he is not a protagonist. He's telling the stories, but he's very much an antagonist, and he is murdering the shit out of people.
Okay. All right. I like it. It's dark. All right. So my next thing that I'm geeking out about is technology based, and that is the advances in virtual medical care. And now, obviously, anything virtual, this is not designed to replace going and seeing your doctor in real life or dealing with big specialists and the real stuff like that. However, I have in myself recently and helped a friend just need to get some antibiotics. You know, I had a tick bite or just something really stupid at 11 o'clock at night on a Friday night. And we use the exchange health insurance, but we're able to like get online in 10 minutes, talk to a doctor face to face, get the prescription, and go get it. And for all of $15.
Yeah.
To go, and it's simple, it's easy, it happens 24 hours a day. It's right there. It is not comprehensive. It's for like the real basic stuff. But I've done that with myself, with my friends, with Charlie, with Charlie, my cat. Was able to do a virtual vet visit that way. It's so cheap. Now I understand like it's tough for the little guy. Like there are some downsides to this for sure. But I think it's really helpful when there's not, you know, you don't want to spend thousands of dollars going to an emergency room, or you may not have access to a clinic that's 24 hours. This $15 in and out in an hour, and you just go pick it up. And that was really, really helpful. And later I'll talk about virtual therapy, but really cool.
Okay, next I'm going to, let me pull up my thing. Next, I want to talk about Players on Paramount Plus. I don't know if you've heard about it. I don't even know if you subscribe to Paramount Plus, but Players is a mockumentary show created by Dan Peralt and Tony Yacenda, who also did American Vandal, which you might have seen, which was a mockumentary about somebody drawing penises all over our school, which is
right, on Netflix.
So much funnier and insightful and than it has any right to deserve, any right to be. And this show is exactly that. It's about a fictional League of Legends esports team, shot mockumentary style, about an old vet and the upcoming newcomer teenager and how they have to work together to win their first league championship. I know nothing about esports. Really not a lot of interest, even though I'm into gaming. I just don't understand it. This doesn't talk down to it. It doesn't make fun of it. It uses all the proper language. I've talked to people it's in on the lingo, but you don't need to know it to follow the story. It's compelling. It's hysterical. The performances are amazing. This show should be terrible, but it is really good. Is it worth subscribing to Paramount Plus? No. But there are plenty of other reasons to subscribe to Paramount Plus or get a free trial or to just watch with ads. Guys, Players, out of nowhere. Thank God someone recommended it to me. So now I'm recommending it to you. Check it out. At least the first 2 or 3 episodes. They're short. They're not even half an hour. Really cool show.
Well, I have a show as well to talk about that. And that is from the creators of Dark Side of the Ring, about the dark side of professional wrestling. There's a new spin-off called Tales from the Territories. It's produced by The Rock and the Dark Side of the Ring folks. It's a sort of documentary about 70s and 80s wrestling before the WWF took it over. And one episode particularly I thought was really fascinating, and that is an episode about Jerry Lawler wrestling Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman was a huge star back in the early 80s. He died very young, but he was sort of an experimental comedian. He was on Taxi. And what he did is he decided to become a wrestling heel, playing himself, and went in all these things, wrestling women, trying to get heat, and had a legendary series of battles with Jerry Lawler, who you might recognize as the commentator from the WWE. A lot of this you can see in Man on the Moon, the movie that they came out with, but it's really fascinating to now hear the story from Jerry Lawler's point of view and realizing how much of it was a work. We thought it, meaning fake, we all thought it was sort of real, but Andy Kaufman's entire career seems like he wanted to be a wrestling heel, and he was that as an actor, as a comedian, and then got a chance to live his dream actually in wrestling. It's fascinating. Check it out. Man on the Moon's a good movie. There's also a good documentary about the making of Man on the Moon with Jim Carrey basically becoming Andy Kaufman.
Is this shot documentary style? Like, do we get interviews and POV and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's shot as a documentary. So it's basically interspersing the original footage with interviews with Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett and a lot of the folks who were there at the time.
So the last thing, Keith, I'll talk about this week is, before I even start, I want to recognize my privilege. I'm very privileged to have a good job and to have expendable income and whatnot. Just want to point that out there. Now I'll begin. So my dad, one of the things he said, and this weird piece of advice, but always says, always have a good pen. I found this recently. This is a pen he was given. It says the Garden State Brickface and Stucco. That was one of the places he worked for as a salesman. $100,000 monthly sales club, and they give him a goddamn pen. And so what I did is I did a lot of research, obsessive research about different design firms, and I came up with the Studio Neat. That's my actual pen. It's called the Mark I. It is a retractable pen. It's all metal. It's coated in this ceramic kind of paint. It's all one design. It's all one piece of unibody metal. It is incredibly satisfying. It's got this rollerball ink. I'm trying to think of what the ink is called. Here you go. It's the Schmidt P8126 rollerball. It's very inky. It's very rolly. It's not messy. It is just a wonderful pen. And if you listen, it's got a really satisfying click. I am loving this pen. It is not cheap. It comes in a cork kind of holder. It's very environmentally safe. It's a design firm that designed it, so you can tell you're paying a premium. I think I paid $70 for this pen. But it is really satisfying. I have it on my desk. I use it for all important things. Something about sitting down and writing in a journal. Though I love my technology, I love to write and keep my notes in ink. So, when you get yourself, when you're feeling it, I highly suggest getting yourself a good pen. And if you're on the market for one, really appreciate the Studio Neat pen. We are not in any way, by the way, supported. This is not an advertisement. It's just
but you should be.
Pen.
Yeah. Wow. See, here's my question to you is how the hell do you not lose your pens? This doesn't
leave my
pens.
office. This doesn't leave the office.
I have nowhere near that type of discipline. All right.
Spend $70 on a pen, Keith. You won't lose it.
No, I will definitely lose it. All right. So the last thing I want to talk about is I've talked a little bit today about how I do a lot of music production. I do a lot of music writing and arranging and recording and mixing and this, that, the other thing. And until recently, all of my demos and stuff have sounded pretty good, right? But not quite finished, not quite
mastered,
completed and that because I had no idea how to master effectively. And just recently, about 2 years ago, that's recent for me, discovered a thing called eMastered. And what that is an online AI mastering software, which you upload your file, it uses AI to master it, and you just download it right away. And the whole thing, it takes 90 seconds, 2 minutes to go through the entire mastering process. Now, is this going to be perfect? Is it going to be, you're going to want to release this nationwide? Well, maybe, but probably not. But for what I do to just do some quick and dirty, clean it up, make sure, get things as balanced as they can be, get them normalized, I think it does a very good job. It's not super cheap. It's about $150 a year for the subscription to do it. But I use it almost every day, and I think it's really quick, it's really simple, it's pretty well designed, and the mastering, I think, and I'm not an expert, is pretty darn good. So eMastered.com if you're curious. They also do not sponsor us, but please do.
Yeah, we often talk about AI in the kind of scary, antagonistic, evil corporation type of way. But if you do a quick Google on some of the incredible things AI can help with nowadays, like all the photoshopping, all of the sort of quick things that used to take rotoscoping. I used DaVinci Resolve as an editing program, and it used to rotoscope something out used to take hours upon hours, and now they can do it with a snap. In fact, if you see some of these image creations where you just type in sort of like a random term and it creates this, it's pretty awesome. If we vote, like Keith said earlier, and get people into office who help foster a general sense of community where this AI stuff can help us rather than kind of tear us down and create deep fakes, I think
and not Terminator us.
Yeah, we could be in a good place.
Yeah. No, it's well, I mean, so much of the show is about how technology is able to make our life better, right? And a lot of it is sort of in silly art ways and in Marvel movies, this other thing, but also just my life. What I do for my everyday life is so vastly improved with good tech in the last 10, 15 years. Like, there's no question. And it's good fun. So do you have things that... Wait, hold on. I'm hosting. Mike, you're hosting.
Yeah, what are you guys using? What makes your life easier? What shortcuts, what AI, which tech you're using? Let us know. That's what we want this show to be about. Share some of your stuff. We'll share some of our stuff. If you'd like to share with us on Twitter... let us know. Hashtag K&M Geekly. Let us know what you've been watching. Let us know about what you've been reading, listening to, geeking out on. I will check that and we'll feature it on the show.
I was going to say, I hope you're checking that.
I am. Well, I'll feature it on the show, or let us know inside the comments. What did I say last week? I said, keep it geekly?
I think something like that. Yeah.
Keep on geeking out, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for checking out.